So the rematch between New Zealand and France is taking place this weekend. In the first test, only the 4 points separating the sides, and now New Zealand, they've stuck with a pretty similar team. France have gone completely different once again, so we will be looking through at that in this preview, as well as some stats from the last match, and also who the keys could be for these two sides in this upcoming second test. But jumping straight into it, for New Zealand, they have made the 5 changes in their lineup, with 3 new players getting the opportunity. In this fixture, in the front row, it is still the same as the last contest. Ethan de Groot at number 1, Cody Taylor 2, and Fletcher Null slotting in as the number 3. Only 3 scrums won by New Zealand throughout that first test up against the French. But Ethan de Groot, he made 11 tackles. Fletcher Null made the 9, and then Cody Taylor in the middle had 38 metres carried with 2 defenders beaten. Also, some brilliant line-out accuracy from Cody Taylor. 100% of New Zealand's line-outs won, 20 from 20. So that's the type of number New Zealand, of course, would like to replicate. And at this fixture, in the number 4 jersey, this is where we see Patrick Tuipulotu move into the starting side. That is rather than Scott Barrett, who did suffer a calf injury in the last contest. Fabian Holland, he will once again be the number 5, 13 carries in that last match, 6 lineouts won, and he also made 16 tackles, making him the leading tackler for the All Blacks throughout Test match. Number 1 in the loose forward trio, this is also unchanged from last week's game. Tupavai as the number 6, he scored himself a try, also had 5 lineouts won. Adi Savia, he will be playing number 7 and also gets the chance to captain the side in Wellington. He was the busiest player when it came to carries for the All Blacks, with 18 in total, making 76 metres and then also beating 4 defenders along the way. And then in the number 8 jersey, it is Christian Leo Willie. Got his debut last week, gets the start again, managed to rack up 11 tackles to his name in the first test. But moving on to the backline, this is where we don't see a huge amount of change for the All Blacks, although a new man coming into the starting side on the wing in the 9-10 combination. It is Cam Roigard and Beauden Barrett. Both statistically had very strong games. Roigard's kicking game has been talked about a bit throughout this week, maybe a bit too deep in that first test, but overall the rest of his numbers very impressive. 84 passes throughout that first match, 55 metres carried, 4 defenders beaten, a try assist, and also a dominant tackle. We only saw a few of them from the All Blacks, but Roigard was one of the men who did manage to put in the big hit. In terms of Beauden Barrett's numbers throughout this contest, he had 2 try assists, 4 defenders beaten, 2 line breaks, and 48 metres carried for the AB's veterans. So that 19 combo, Razor has said we'll give it another go and we'll see what it can do in Test match. Number 2 in the midfield combo will be Jordie Barrett alongside Billy Proctor. Now Barrett, it was his first game back in New Zealand for quite some time, but he was phenomenal in that 12 jersey, partnering with Proctor, who did have the most dominant tackles out of any All Black with 2. But I do think that he will definitely want a big game heading into this matchup. A lot of people have been criticising his defence, so he'll want to prove them wrong in this contest. Out on the left wing, it was initially going to be Caleb Clark, but due to a high ankle injury, it does mean that he is ruled out of this test match. It brings Rieko Ioane back to the left like he was in the first test match, and then out on the right wing, we do see Amoni Narawa. These will be his first minutes for the All Blacks of 2025. They may be his only minutes if Scott Robertson doesn't select him in the Rugby Championship squad, but he certainly should. As Amoni Narawa, he had an outstanding season for the Chiefs. He has a very high tackle accuracy, as well as just being a dangerous ball runner for the All Blacks. And at this contest, now later on in the video, I talk about the matchup between Rieko Ioane and Galeton. Just be sure to scrap that. This was recorded later on. This little update about the injury, so a little bit of a weird Inception type of thing going on at the moment. Rieko Ioane, he also received quite a bit of criticism from that first match, although with the exception of not chasing those kicks hard and also that handling error at the start of the second half that led to a French try, Rieko throughout the game actually had some pretty decent numbers to his name. He had 3 line breaks, the most of any player in the match, 78 metres carried, 2 defenders beaten, a dominant tackle, and he did make 100% of his tackles, although he did only have to make 3 throughout that first match. So I do think that Razor, looking at those numbers, you can understand why he would put him back in. In the 15 jersey, he played a minute in the first contest in this fullback role. Will Jordan, 2 tries, 15 carries, 62 metres carried in that department, 2 line breaks, 4 defenders beaten, and a try assist. Almost had a hat trick, but narrowly missing out for Will Jordan. He is a clinical try scorer. He also has pure pace, which can work very well if he is playing 15 because he'll be able to chase those kicks of Barrett as well as Cam Roygaard. But overall, no matter where you play him in a starting lineup, it seems like Will Jordan can bring that impact, so he'll be one to keep an eye on for this matchup. Looking through at the bench, there is only really the one change. Damian McKenzie, he moves from 22 to 23 in this match, but then the man coming in for Quintupai, it is Timothy Tavatavanawai. It will be an All Blacks debut for the Highlander, who has been absolutely phenomenal throughout the Super Rugby Pacific season. He gets turnovers, he beats defenders. I'm very curious to see how Scott Robertson uses him later on in the game, whether it will be a straight swap for Geordie Barrett at number 12, or perhaps he even slots out onto the wing. We could also see a complete backline reshuffle if needed, but overall it would be great to see him get at least 20 minutes at the end of this game just to give him enough time to really make that impact. In terms of Damian McKenzie, he certainly made an impact in match number 1. He had 17 carries, which made him the second most throughout the contest. 90 metres carried, which was the most out of any player in this match, and also beat 6 defenders from the back. He had that really elusive run that all but got him a try. In the end, the All Blacks, couple phases later, still did score it, but McKenzie is one to keep an eye out for off the bench as an impact player. Once again, could slot into 15, or we could see him in the number 10 jersey, but a very handy player for the ABs to have later on. And at the match, moving on to this French team now, like I mentioned, they have made wholesale changes to their starting lineup and reserves. They have 14 changes, with 11 new players getting the chance here. In Wellington, in the forward pack, the only man that keeps a spot in the starting pack is actually Gaëtan Barlow. He did start in the number 2 jersey. He had 16 tackles throughout the contest. He also had 100% line-out accuracy, as neither side got a single steal throughout that last match. The other man is Jacobus van Tonder. He will be starting in the number 7 jersey, but he did come off the bench in last week's game, so one of the only few changes we actually see across this French bench for the contest. But they have got rid of their 2 locks. Instead, it is Josh Brennan and Matthias Halagahu who comes in as that number 5. They have got rid of the 2 standouts in the loose forward trio in Fisher and Gilliard. Between those 2 men making 38 tackles in the first match and also having 4 turnovers won. And a couple interesting stats that I'll be mentioning later on does go a little bit deeper into the turnovers won compared to who is in the starting lineup here. Nolan Lee Garrick, he will start as the 9 once more, with Segans as the 10. I thought that combo did pretty well in the first test match. Segans has shown off his skill when it comes to his kicking game, whether that is in general play or off the kicking tee. Seemed to be fully in control of what France wanted to do throughout that matchup. Gaëtan, he did start the last match as the number 13. He will go out to the left wing. That is rather than Gabin Villiers, and that is a huge hit, I feel, to the starting lineup. Although we do need to remember, for France, this tour, even though that first game was close, they had a plan heading into it, and that was to try out the young players who made this squad. So whether this game will be competitive like the first, or maybe we do see New Zealand run away with it a bit more, Galtier still wants to try out these young guys to work out who can go into that November squad, as well as the Six Nations in 2026. So Gaëtan, he will move out to the left, like I mentioned. In the midfield, it will be Barassi and Deportier. So no Galficu for this match. So that loses about 95 caps worth of experience for France. Out on the right wing, Theo Atasogbe, who was playing 15, moves to 14, and then Leo Bear comes in as that number 15. So overall for France, like I said, a lot of changes. There might be an adjustment period in the early stages of the contest, but normally when New Zealand have back-to-back games up against an opponent, they go with a similar lineup for the first and the second test. So perhaps that also works a little bit in France's favour, that this is still a new-look team for New Zealand to face, so there might be an adjustment period for the All Blacks. And at this game as well, off the bench, pretty similar to what we saw in the first test match. Paul Mallet as the number 17. He actually made 12 tackles throughout the contest, which put him at second for tackles per minute played in this whole matchup. And then Cameron Walkie as the number 20. He too will be one to watch out for, scoring a try in the last match. But now we will jump into a few of the statistics from the first match. First one, tries. New Zealand scoring 4 throughout that first match, France. They did get themselves the 3. And overall, like I said, this game was a lot closer at the end score than many did anticipate. New Zealand dominating a lot of the other stats. 22-metre entries, New Zealand having 13, France having the 5 line breaks, New Zealand having 13, France having 4. New Zealand had almost double the carries with 182 to the 94 of the French. France having to make an extra 100 tackles in test match number 1 with 220, still tackling though at 88% accuracy. New Zealand making 120 tackles, and they were tackling at 93% there. An interesting stat that I spotted though when going through that first match was actually the ruck speed. Now, I didn't realise this at the time, but for New Zealand throughout that match, they had 62% of their rucks played between 0 and 3 seconds, which is actually pretty speedy. There were a few times that it seemed like France were very competitive in terms of slowing it down in that breakdown and possibly getting the turnover, but 62% New Zealand were able to clear that ball in quite quick fashion. 47% for France in that department, and France having an extra 10% of their rucks going for more than 6 seconds throughout. That matchup, possession and territory, they were both in New Zealand's favour with 62%. Both sides having 100% line out. Both sides having 100% for their scrums. So when you look through at that, you would say a 4-point margin. France would be pretty happy with how that first match went. Not just because heading into it, they were being ruled out, but also across the whole board, you look at those numbers and you say, how did New Zealand not win by more points when you're dominating possession, when you're tiring out your opposition? But we also have to remember New Zealand, the 3 disallowed tries in that first contest, have 1 or 2 of those been scored, you're looking at a very different kind of scoreline at the end of this contest. So I think for New Zealand, clinical finishing is exactly what they'll be trying to do. I believe Scott Robertson has already reiterated that throughout the week, that they know what they need to improve on. No huge changes to positions across the starting lineup. I'd say the biggest one is the fact that Tui Pelotu is in for Barrett. But overall, a very similar 4-pack, just the one change. Whereas for France, they've got the 7. So it is high risk, high reward for Les Bleus. In this contest, I've got a whole page of statistics that we could go into, including the one about turnovers won. 6 of the 7 we did see from France are players who are not going to be taking part in the second test match, whereas for New Zealand, 4 of their 5 turnovers, they are playing in this match. So Gabin Villiers, he got himself the 2. Gilliard, the number 8, got 1. But an outstanding player in the breakdown throughout test match number 1 was actually the number 6, Fisher. He was tied for most tackles out of any player on the field, plus getting 3 turnovers. I do think that, yes, you've got to give new guys opportunity, but that's going to be a big gap that needs to be filled. So whether or not France can do that, or whether with his absence New Zealand can capitalise, we will, of course, have to wait and see. There is also a head-to-head that I am intrigued with in this matchup, and it is Rieko Ioane versus Gailleton. Now, the reason for that is Ioane had some good numbers, like I said in the first match. Gailleton, he had some decent ones too, but one of the numbers that stood out to me was 5 missed tackles throughout that first contest. Now, originally, I'm sure Rieko Ioane was expecting to face off with Gabin Villiers, but that has not been the case. Gailleton, the 5 missed tackles, that could lead to Rieko getting some very good opportunity if Gailleton cannot minimise the amount of tackles missed in test match number 2. Also, a little bit of a irrelevant fact, I guess you could say, to end off this video. Severis, he played 1 minute throughout that match up against the French, but statistically, Severis had the highest tackles per minute of any player throughout this contest with 2. Now, unfortunately, he knocked himself out in one of those 2 tackles, but if there was any sort of positive for Severis in this match, it was he was the busiest tackler for that minute that he was on the field. Speedy recovery, of course, to him. I saw that he was joking about it on Instagram. More than likely, though, we'll be missing the rest of this French series, but perhaps we will see him back for the Rugby Championship. But nonetheless, I do thank you all very much for tuning into this preview. I will be honest, it was a bit all over the place at times. I feel like this game, there's so much to look at, but with such a new side for France, it makes it once again a little bit similar to comparing last year's November Internationals game. When these 2 sides played off, a lot of the stats then kind of go out the window because this is a new France team. It is an experimental series. So because of that, of course, we can read off all the stats we want, But until we see the two sides playing on the field, similar to that first match, it's very hard to judge what exactly will be happening. But we will be doing the live commentary on the channel, ladies and gentlemen. So be sure to check that out. If you did enjoy, of course, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And also let me know your score prediction for test match number 2 in the comments down below. But thank you all very much for tuning in, and I will see you all for the next one.